this one is, I think it's like Yum Yum or something like that. And this one here, these are the directions of how to make sushi. But what's kind of interesting is that these are Japanese comic books that have been translated into Chinese. So these are actually the old Taiwanese characters, but they're actually Japanese images. So, and what goes funny is the Taiwanese always burn it for good luck. And some Taiwanese friends came over and was like, "What are you doing with this? You're inviting the ghosts into your home. You're going to have bad luck." But so far I've had pretty good luck, so yeah. And this one here is, it's just I love milk. This was the label on our milk container, which I thought was pretty cool. So a lot of this has just been done just for my own interest. In fact, some of these you'll see were done in 1998, and this is the first time I've ever shown them, ever. So they've been locked up in my basement, in my parents' basement, for 10 years. So after Taiwan, I moved back to Victoria, and I decided I wanted to be an English teacher. I really liked teaching, and so I went to UVic again, because I really like Victoria as well, and I did a degree in linguistics. So then I was full-on English teaching, and I didn't do a lot in Canada because I was studying and going to school and working. But after 3 years, I decided I really wanted to go back overseas again. So I ended up going to Shanghai. And I actually brought some of these blocks with me because I figured, well, they'll have lots of paper in China and I can do it again and get going. And when I got there, I realized China doesn't have a lot of art supplies. They have ink and they have brushes, and that's about it. So, and I didn't have all my supplies with me. So since then I've learned that I have to bring all my supplies from Canada wherever I go because you just do not know what's available on the other side. But in Shanghai, what they did have is the fabric markets. So Shanghai and Hangzhou are famous for silk, and they have these really great fabric markets that if you take any kind of clothes, you can get them remade and everything. And I wasn't so interested in that, but I did go to the fabric markets a lot with friends who were getting things made and having to go back. And they're kind of interesting places because they have all these stalls and people have all these different bits of material. So you might have like the silk section, and everybody there is selling silk, and then you have the cotton section and the taffeta section. So I started walking around and seeing all this really beautiful material and shiny, and it's just really tactile. But I don't sew. I've never used a sewing machine in my life. I don't know how to sew. So I got this idea to start making blankets, which you see there's one just around the corner in front of the, right there, yeah. You can see it on the way out. So luckily, being as short as I am, I have to take fusible hem tape to do my pants all the time. So I had lots of fusible hem tape, so I started making these blankets with the characters and buying this really great material at the fabric market. So for 3 years, I made about 8 or 9 blankets, and I mainly gave them away for Christmas presents and that kind of stuff. But I have a couple. My mom has one, my sister has one, and there's one over there. That's a character for long life. But I got the idea because I went to Hangzhou, which is, Marco Polo had gone to Hangzhou and said it was the most magnificent city in the world, which at the time it probably was, because there were, I think it was 114 pagodas around the big lake, and after the Cultural Revolution there's more like 14. So that's a real big difference between Taiwan and mainland China, is that Taiwan looks really Chinese because the Cultural Revolution didn't get there, so they have all those temples and they have all that stuff. But the people are very Western thinking. But when you get to mainland China, they're very Chinese thinking. But the place, especially Shanghai, looks very Western. So it's a real different kind of, I was really surprised at how different Taiwan and the mainland really were. So I started sewing up these blankets, and I was walking around in the sidewalk along the lake in Hangzhou, and there were these big characters that were printed in, and I thought, well, these would be kind of cool. There's like long life, and I recognized some of them from Taiwan. But of course, mainland China now uses simplified characters. They don't use the old ones anymore. And the simplified ones are not as pretty, actually. So I decided, oh, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to make this long life character in this. And then I took it to my school that I was working at, and I said, look at my blanket. And they said, that's really beautiful. What's that thing in the middle? And I said, what do you mean, what's this thing in the middle? It's the character for long life. Oh, we don't know those things anymore. We use simplified character. We don't care about the old culture so much anymore. And I was really surprised that they could not recognize. And I'm like, are you kidding me? It's on like every bowl I've bought, since moving to China. So I was really surprised that China is sort of losing that connection to the really old characters, like just the main people. I'm sure if you study art, you know it, but I was really shocked. So that's part of me being in art history. I think every blanket I made after that had a big character in the middle of it. So that was great. And then I stayed in China for 2.5 years, and I was a kindergarten teacher in Shanghai, which on some levels is really great. I got to cut lots of paper and decorate everything, and I got kind of back into my art skills. It was really great. But I decided after 2 years that teaching kindergarten really wasn't what I wanted to do. It's hard. After a while, it's really hard. So I made a giant leap. Actually, I was in China waiting for a job that UVic was trying to set up, trying to create a program for Chinese people because their education system is so different to be trained in a Western way of thinking before they come to UVic. So we were trying to set this up and it wasn't working. And finally, somebody wrote me and said, I think this is going to be another 6 months before we're ready to do this, but we have another job opportunity, and because you like to travel, it's in the United Arab Emirates. How would you like to go? It's a lot of money for 2 months. So I was like, okay. So I was going to make basically 6 months of Taiwan wages in 2 months in the Emirates. So how could I say no? So the next thing you know, I came home. I think I was home for 8 days. Came home from China, repacked my bags, bought some clothes that covered my, my elbows and my ankles and everything, and off I went. So 8 days later, there I was in the United Arab Emirates. And there I had some lovely pictures to show you of this, because I thought it would be nice to explain a little bit of what my life was like in the Emirates. The biggest question I get asked in Canada is, what did you have to wear? And I wore, in public, t-shirts and croppy pants and flip-flops all the time. Pretty much what I wear in Canada. So I didn't have to cover my head, I didn't have to wear anything special. And as a foreigner, it's kind of expected that that's what you would wear. So I had this great picture of the villa that we used to stay in, because they looked very grandiose with these big columns and very Italian-looking kind of on the outside of them. But inside, because they were just housing, and actually I have 2 of my roommates from Abu Dhabi here, so you guys can speak up if you like to say. But the walls were totally white. Like they have a couch and a chair and, just enough for us to live, a couple, fridge, whatever you enter bedrooms, which is basic stuff inside. And so I just found it really kind of maddening that you would come home, when you're outside, everything is beige, the ground is beige, the buildings are white and beige, the sky never gets quite blue, it has something to do with the atmosphere, so it's very light colored all the time. So I found it to be a place that was really void of color, and then we get home to these villas, and there'd be these giant white walls of nothing. And so one of the things that I started to do in my free time on the weekends is I just started trying to cover the walls with all sorts of stuff. So I started doing paper cuts, and I did some paintings, and I did whatever, and it was just basically to fill up the walls, and my roommates, see, you guys didn't mind.
We loved it.
So that's what I started to do. I just started to get back into painting that way, and then after 2 years, I decided that I didn't want to live in the Emirates anymore, and my sister was living in Turkey, and I love Turkey, as you can probably see. So I picked up and I moved to Istanbul, and I decided to take a year off. I'm also a yoga teacher, so I taught yoga, and I painted, and I lived in Sultanahmet, which is my favorite place in the entire world, other than Ermine, of course. So I started to paint in gouache simply because that's what my sister had. And I stole her paints, and I stole her brushes, and I started going for it. Gouache is like watercolor, but it's a bit more opaque. It has more chalk in it than watercolor. Watercolor is more transparent. But it's basically, you can't really tell the difference between them, I find. I don't know if you find any difference between the two.
Yeah, and gouache has more color power. That's basically what
Yeah. So I started gouache. I use watercolor like gouache all the time. I'm bad that way. But anyway, what was really lovely about that is I put some pictures of it on the internet, and some friends saw it. And, these are really, really great, and you should really think about putting a show together. So the first show that we had, my sister and I decided we were going to put a show on. And we've never put a show on, but we've always made this stuff, and we had tons of stuff around, but we never thought about it. This was stuff for us. It was just for fun, and this was what we did. So we did put a little show together. We had a neighbor of ours owned a pizza place down the the street, and so we decided, well, we're going to have a show in the pizza place. And then sure enough, we met somebody else who was a journalist and said, you know what, I'm going to do an article about you guys and put it in the Turkish newspaper. And we were like, okay. So here we were, you know, with our paintings. And we had this tiny little, we had a one-day opening at this show just for fun to see who would show up. And I think we had about 90 people show up. We were just really surprised. So that was really fantastic. And it was really well received. We even had some people from the Canadian consulate come and buy work, and that was pretty exciting. And then we had another one a couple months later down the street, and that's when I started to really get serious about painting and really started to take everything a lot more serious. So you can see in these two pictures here of the Hagia Sophia, the first one was me just messing around with some paints, which actually a lot of people really like that little one in the middle. It's got a really fun energy to it.
The one in the middle is your first one?
The one in the middle is the first one I did.
Okay.
And then you can see the one next to it is the last one I did, which was actually just this winter.
The one on the right? Or
The one on the right is the Hagia Sophia.
the last one, right?
Is the last one.
Okay.
Yeah,
They
so you
all
got the
have
first one and
birds.
the last one.
They got birds.
They all have birds because, well, this is actually kind of a fun story too. When I was living in, I met a guy who's a Hungarian journalist who works for Der Spiegel magazine, and he really liked the Hagia Sophia, but he didn't like the birds. The birds were silly. This is what he told me. The birds look silly, and I can't have silly birds. And the reason he couldn't have silly birds was because he had heard that the birds, that they get trapped in the lights around the mosque, so they're like flying around, and they just get confused because the lights of the mosques are up and they feel it's daytime, and they fly around until they turn the lights off, and then they all go to sleep. But what happened was, he said he had heard a legend that the birds were the souls of the concubines that had been thrown into the river by the Sultan and drowned. So these were the souls of drowned concubines. So you cannot have silly looking birds. And could I do him another painting and have the birds look more feminine? So, what I did is I actually painted him an Hagia Sophia with concubines flying over top of the mosque, which you would have seen if my PowerPoint presentation would have worked.
Yeah.
But, so there it is. So I actually did the girls, and I actually researched the Ottoman dress of what they would actually wear, and so I have these girls flying above the mosque, and he loves it, and it's on his wall in Hungary now, and it's great. So that was pretty fun. So, and then of course there's the Blue Mosque next to it, which is one of my favorite buildings. And yeah, so, and around the corner you can see some of the old Turkish, those were the ones we had in Turkey. These two I actually painted in Canada, I admit. So after a year of living in Turkey, I decided, you know what, I really love not having a job, and I really love painting, and I really love living here. However, there comes a time where you have to suck it up and figure out, what are you doing, right? And I was not sure if I wanted to go back to teaching English at that point, but then I started to think, you know what, I do really like teaching, and I am a good teacher. I know that from teaching ESL for so long. And I do like traveling, and so it just made sense at the time, and it still does sort of make sense, to come back to Canada and go back to UBC and become an art teacher. So I spent a year upgrading. Last year I took a textiles course for an entire year, which was actually really interesting. It certainly improved my understanding and appreciation for textiles because they're actually really, really difficult to produce. So back-breaking work. And so I came back, I did that, and now I'm in week 2 at UBC, and it's killing me. So, especially trying to get this together and sort out my homework at the same time. So, so that's what I'm doing now.